All right. So today we're going to do a deep dive into something that I think a lot of people have experience with, and that is dating apps. Specifically, we're looking at the psychological effects of these on men, and we're going to be using an article called Dating App Burnout, A Man's Psychological Perspective.
Mhm.
And the author just refers to himself as like an average guy. So, he's not some sort of like expert or anything like that. He's just a regular dude who's been using dating apps and wanted to share his experiences. And I think a lot of what he talks about will resonate with a lot of people, especially
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
So, he talks about his experiences on like Tinder and Bumble and Hinge, kind of the big three right now.
Yeah.
And he talks about this constant cycle of like shifts, rarely getting matches, and then when you do get matches, you get ghosted or the dates get canceled, and it's just like,
Yeah.
this is so frustrating.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, what he's describing is really kind of this phenomenon of false hope where you're constantly chasing this reward, connection, a date. And it seems like it's just within reach, right? But it rarely materializes.
Yeah.
And it can be psychologically really draining,
Yeah.
especially because these apps are designed to keep you hooked with that possibility of a match.
Yeah, I mean, have you ever felt like you're just stuck in this loop of swiping and hoping? You're just swiping, swiping, swiping. You're like, oh, maybe this time, and then nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Like say, it's like a slot machine, right? Where you keep pulling a lever, hoping for a win. But the wins are so infrequent and they're so unpredictable that it can really mess with your head.
Yeah, and he uses this great analogy. He describes it as like a carrot being dangled in front of you, always just out of reach. And it's like you can never quite get to it.
That's a great way to put it. And, it really makes you think about the whole instant gratification culture that we live in now, where we're so used to getting what we want when we want. But dating, even in the digital age, it just doesn't work that way.
Right. It's like you can't just order a date on Amazon Prime. You actually have to put in the time and the effort.
And sometimes even when you do put in the time and the effort, it still doesn't work out.
Yeah, and that's something else he talks about, is that even when he did go on dates, they often didn't live up to the hype. He talks about feeling like the women weren't interested or were even rude at times.
That's interesting.
And it makes you wonder, is there something about the whole dating app context that just sets us up for disappointment?
It's possible. Think about it. Profiles can be misleading. So you might be going into a date with expectations that don't match reality. And then there's this pressure to make a perfect first impression in a very limited time frame, which can make things feel really awkward. And then on top of that, there's just this sheer volume of options on these apps. It can be hard to genuinely connect with someone when you're constantly aware that there are countless other potential matches just to swipe away.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's not even just about the awkward dates. I mean, the author also talks about the whole rejection aspect. He says that all of these experiences started to really affect his mental health. He started to have self-doubt. He felt demoralized.
That's understandable. Even though it's happening in the digital world, rejection still triggers a real emotional response. Our brains are wired to feel the sting of rejection, whether it's face-to-face or through a screen. And when you're constantly facing rejection on these apps, it can really take a toll on your self-esteem and your confidence.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. So we're starting to see how these apps, while convenient, can also have a real psychological downside. But here's the thing. The article also asks, why are these apps so popular if they're so frustrating? And the author's argument is that they're filling a void that's been created by the way our society has changed.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Think about it. There are fewer public spaces for meeting people these days, and people have more anxiety about approaching strangers. And then there's the whole issue of workplace romance and the risks involved. So, in a way, dating apps offer a solution, albeit an imperfect one.
Right. It's like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Traditional dating feels harder than ever. But then dating apps come with their own set of psychological landmines.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating. Because it really raises the question, are dating apps a symptom of our modern dating struggles? Or are they actually contributing to the problem?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's one that we're going to keep exploring as we continue this deep dive. So stay tuned.
Yeah, it really makes you think. Like, is this just one guy's experience? Or is this like, something bigger about how we date today?
I think it's definitely bigger. I mean, it's not just about the apps themselves. It's about, the whole landscape of dating and how it's changed.
Yeah, exactly. Like, are these apps just a reflection of our struggles, or are they making things worse?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a bit of both, to be honest. Like, On the one hand, they do address a need, like people are looking for connection, and traditional ways of meeting people have become harder, you know.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, these apps bring in all these new anxieties and pressure.
Like what kind of pressures?
Well, think about the constant comparison. Like you're swiping through all these profiles and you're judging and being judged
Right.
based on like a couple of photos and like a tiny bio.
Right. It's like the gamification of attraction.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
feel really superficial. And it's interesting because the author doesn't really offer any solutions. He just kind of lays out the problem. It's like he's saying, hey, this is the reality of dating apps now.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes the article so interesting. It's not like a self-help guide. It's just like a raw, honest look at the downsides of these apps.
So should we all just delete our dating apps then? Go back to the old school ways of meeting people?
I mean, it's not that simple, right?
Hmm.
Like the author points out, those traditional methods have their own challenges now. We're more isolated. We rely on technology so much. And maybe we're just more afraid of face-to-face rejection.
So it's like a no-win situation.
It can feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's hopeless. I think the key is awareness. If we understand the downsides, we can use these apps more mindfully, set boundaries, manage expectations, and prioritize our mental health.
Right. Which is good advice in general.
Absolutely.
The author does say that quitting the apps was good for his mental health, but he still has some anxiety.
That makes sense. It's like breaking a bad habit. It takes time to undo the patterns.
And I think it's interesting how he ends the article. He asks how women's experiences might be different or similar to his.
Yeah, that's a huge question, right?
Yeah,
We've been focusing on the male perspective, but it's important to consider the female perspective too.
for sure. There are probably some big differences, but I bet there are some overlaps too.
Definitely. It's all part of this bigger conversation
Yeah.
about how we navigate relationships in the digital age.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges, the societal context, the potential for harm, and the potential for healing. When it comes to dating apps, what's the biggest takeaway for you?
I think for me, it's the power of awareness. These apps aren't inherently good or bad,
Mm-hmm.
but they can have a huge impact on our mental and emotional well-being. So the more we understand how they work, the better choices we can make.
Knowledge is power.
Exactly.
Okay, well, before we wrap up, I have one more thought to throw out there. It's funny because reading this, I was thinking about how, like, a lot of what he's saying is just being human. You know, like that need to connect, that fear of rejection, trying to figure out how to have relationships in this world where technology's everywhere. Like, that's everyone, right? Not just men.
Yeah, totally. I
Right.
mean, he's giving us a man's perspective, but these themes are universal. Self-doubt, anxiety, social situations, modern dating. I mean, it's something we're all dealing with.
Yeah. And I think it highlights the need for us to be more understanding of each other. Like guys and girls, we're all just trying to figure this out. You
Right.
know, some people listening might be feeling kind of bummed out right now. Like, wow, this dating scene sounds rough.
I get it. It can feel overwhelming,
Especially with how fast everything's changing.
but I think there's hope. You know, just acknowledging these challenges is a step forward.
And talking about them so we can all be more aware. And hopefully that awareness will help us make better choices. Like
Yeah.
you were saying, about being more mindful on the apps, setting boundaries,
Yeah. And maybe even just taking a break sometimes.
taking a break from the apps.
Yeah, or even just from dating in general,
Oh, that's interesting.
just to kind of reset.
Yeah. So maybe it's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. I mean, we all want to be connected,
Right.
and that's a beautiful thing,
It is.
even when it's messy and complicated.
So true. Well, I think we've given everyone a lot to think about today. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this question, the same one the author asks at the end of his article. What do you think women's experiences are like on these apps? Do they face the same challenges? Different challenges? It's a conversation we need to have. So let's keep thinking about it. And if you want to share your thoughts, we're always here to listen. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And until next time, remember, knowledge is power.